Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. A troubling story involving a child and substance use has brought up a conversation around naloxone, a life-saving medication, and whether it should be in all schools. More than a week ago, a 13-year-old Hartford student overdosed in school and then died after taking fentanyl. Today we talked to the Superintendent of Hartford Public Schools, Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez, about the district's response and support for the community. And later we also hear from a parent whose son died from an overdose. And we talked to Dr. Craig Allen, Medical Director at Rushford, a substance use prevention and treatment center, about services for those struggling with opioid use. The need for services has grown over the last 2 years. We'll talk more about that coming up. Joining us first on Zoom is Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez. Again, she's Superintendent of Hartford Public Schools. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Our listeners can also join us. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Dr. Torres-Rodriguez, you've been an educator for 25 years. How did this child's death and the events leading up to it impact you?
You know, this is a just unimaginable tragedy. And, you know, the safety and the well-being of our students, our staff, our community matters deeply to me, to all of us. And it's heartbreaking knowing that this is something we didn't expect, and now thinking about how to continue to support our community through this.
When you talk about continuing to support the community, no doubt this child's passing impacted his peers and teachers and staff. So can you talk about the steps you've taken to reopen this school since his passing and what you've been hearing from the school community?
Yes. So first, you know, I do want to continue to extend my heart condolences to the family and to the entire community at SMSA, and even broadly. You are absolutely right that when we lose a student and we have a tragedy like this, there are deep and wide, right? The ripples are deep and wide. And so immediately we had to support students with regard to just the emotional, the counseling. We deployed our crisis team, and that actually is an effort that continues, and we will continue to do that as long as we have to. There were pieces that we had to clarify for the community with regard to, what exactly did we mean by decontaminating and cleaning a school building, right? These are our learning places and spaces. And so part of our support and response had to include a level of understanding as to those technical pieces, which was new to all of us. And then determining when the school would be safe for reentry, and coupling that with the emotional and the social emotional support. And so in addition to in-person and virtual counseling and support by our school social workers and counselors, we also were so fortunate to have our partners on hand at the ready to support with additional counseling. And that included, telehealth counseling from our partners at Connecticut Children's, for example. We have our therapy dogs that have been at the Sports and Medical Science Academy. Students had a modified reentry so that our staff could have time to process and talk to one another, and then even, create space for staff to review how they might engage in conversations with students upon the reentry. And so, yes, we're focusing on the school, but it's also district-wide. And so we were very intentional in even, right after we learned of the students passing, to extend supports to the entire community by not only having the clinicians available, but also sharing resources for families. How do you engage in this conversation with your child? And we continue those supports, for example, at multiple levels of the organization. I will share that this week, for example, even my own team, my executive cabinet, we will have our own session, if you will, given that we've not had an opportunity to step back and process what this all has meant for us, at an emotional level, while we're still, leading our community through this.
You mentioned, when we talk about reopening the school, also the decontamination process. And so I wanted to just get some more context, put some more context into this conversation when you mentioned decontamination, because after the child overdosed in school, and police and others later determined it was because of ingesting fentanyl. Police also say they found 40 bags of fentanyl stashed in the school in different locations. And so can you talk about that? Because it's troubling to hear that this happened to a child, but then the fact that this drug, this poison, was in the school. And, moving forward, how to keep the school safe from this happening again.
Yes, and we know that there is no new information to share regarding the status of the criminal investigation. We actually are looking forward to our partners at Hartford Police Department to hopefully share more information with the community in the near future. To your point, it is highly concerning to us, to our families. And so we know that, this was a highly potent, dangerous drug. And yes, 40 bags were found. As to where specifically, we are waiting for all of those details. And, as part of that safety plan and the transition plan, we have communicated to our families that we will continue to implement additional safety measures. For example, we had already across the district in middle schools and high schools implemented safety screenings, and that includes bag checks and no-touch wanding of students entering the school during arrival. It is a protocol that was in place to do that at least twice a year in our middle and our high schools. And also is this other level of awareness, Lucy, to engage in conversations with all staff members and with partners and families as to what it is that this drug fentanyl could look like, what is the impact of it, and how do we have ongoing conversations with one another about it, and what we can look for from peer to peer, teacher to student, parent to child, or even staff to staff, given, as I have learned, how now prevalent, the fentanyl is becoming in our communities.
When you talk about bag checks and doing those twice a year, is this something that you anticipate will be done more often?
Correct. Yes, it is a conversation that we have already begun to have in terms of modifying our safety, our general safety plan. As I said, these bag checks were something that we implemented when we actually began hearing of on social media threats, right? It's something that we wanted to be proactive about. And so we will continue to do those and additional random checks. So you're absolutely right with regard to clarifying whether or not this is going to be more. Yes, they are going to increase.
You're hearing Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez here on Where We Live. She's superintendent of Hartford Public Schools, as we talk to her about the steps that are being taken in the school district after this child, this 13-year-old, overdosed while in school about more than a week ago. Turned out that this child had ingested fentanyl. If you have questions, you can join us, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. When we talk about substance use, this is, it touches every community. And when you talk about the community that Hartford Public Schools serves, when you hear about increased use of fentanyl, there's also been a lot of discussions about Narcan and the role that this opioid antidote could play if this were to happen again in schools. Tell us about how the district is now approaching having Narcan or Naloxone in school.
Yes, we are actually supplying Naloxone into all schools and buildings in our district immediately. We have never experienced an overdose incident in our schools before, and we hope and pray that it will never happen again. If there is even a small chance that an incident like this could occur, we want to have Naloxone available. I understand that fentanyl is extremely potent and that these overdoses happen very fast and that it might even be difficult to reverse, even with multiple doses. Nonetheless, and regardless, we want to have it on hand. And just last week, our training had begun. Our nurses, our health clinic staff, given that we do have 6 health clinics in our district, school administrators were trained on one opioid overdose identification, response, and naloxone administration. And so we are awaiting for our delivery, and we'll have it available across all of our schools.
I'm glad that you talked about training, because it's one thing to have this available, but to have staff understand and be able to respond to an overdose, to recognize it, that can be challenging.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so we've taken a holistic approach to that understanding. First of all, we are a learning organization, and many of us, myself included, have done a lot of learning in the last week as to, again, the prevalence, how easily available this drug is, the many forms in which it can show up, and what it is that we need to do to recognize the visual signs, the cues, and then where to go. And so from our teachers to our social workers to our health staff to our nurses to administrators to my central office team, we are engaging in taking a learner stance as to this new information for us, and we want to do the same with our students and with our families. And so we have a series of learning opportunities and virtual learning opportunities, and we're looking forward to our district-wide, if you will, community forum this Tuesday, where we invite our families, our caregivers, and even our community partners to learn along with us as to what are those signs, how can they intervene, and where to go for support.
Narcan has been in the news for some time. I remember back in 2011 when Connecticut passed the Good Samaritan law to help people have access to not be arrested by police if they're on hand for an overdose. Conversations from families impacted by substance use disorder, by organizations that help people struggling with substance use disorder. Why did it take this particular incident to have this conversation about having Narcan in all schools, Dr. Torres-Rodriguez?
It was something that was not on the radar, quite frankly. And I've had this conversation even with several colleagues, superintendents in Connecticut, even across my colleagues across the country. And wow, what a painful way, what an unfortunate way to have to respond to something. And I also want to lift that while these conversations, as you say, might have been happening, like the conversation around naloxone cannot happen in isolation, right? There's an intersectionality here around, substance abuse and mental and behavioral health, and creating places and spaces, learning places and spaces where students feel, connected and safe to reach out for anyone in a school community to know what to look for those that outside of the school community interplay and serve student and youth. I mean, it is broader. I hear the conversation on naloxone and how important it is to have it, yes, but having the conversation in isolation will not do us well. This requires a macro systemic approach to addressing what is in front of all of us.
With what you just shared, can we talk about the role of peers? How you can communicate to other students that it's okay to come forward if they know something that might impact a friend or a classmate without fear that they will get in trouble?
Yeah, that is an area that we continue to try to drive home with all of our students across all grades. We strongly encourage families and staff to talk to children about the serious risks of illicit drugs, which may contain, right, these dangerous substances. We encourage students to reach out to counselors, teachers, social workers. We've even put in place structures, right? We know that we have the partnership with Sandy Hook Promise, and students can, call, or there's an app even for that. They say something, they see something, they say something. We understand that from a developmental perspective and peer pressure perspective, it might be hard for some students. To my point earlier around creating those safe and those relationships, right, for students to feel like they are safe in going to someone anonymously or not. And there's also the educational aspect for students as well, right? What does it mean to see someone and to notice that you have a peer that is showing up differently, and how to go about either extending support or getting support. And so it is broader, which is why we're infusing it into the conversations. And even, we've deployed, just last week, we deployed resources for teachers and school leaders to have conversations across all grade levels, right? The way that you have a conversation around substance use or prevention and awareness with a third grader obviously is very, very different than a high schooler. And so we're being very intentional about that as well. But again, all grounded in creating places and spaces in which students feel safe to reach out to someone else and express a concern.
You mentioned Sandy Hook Promise, so I understand that your school district is partnering with them to run the Say Something training. So this is for all middle and high school students, is that right?
It is. It is a partnership that we actually had already started, and we had sessions planned for this week, and we've tweaked them a little bit to have a more of an emphasis on what do I need to look for, right, as a student in my peers, and how can I engage in these conversations with my peer and then with an adult about what I'm seeing. Is it, we want to make sure that students, of course, know who to reach out to, but that if students see or hear about any potential safety issues, drugs, school threats, possible suicide, or other concerns, that they know when and how to tell someone.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there's going to be a virtual town hall. I think that's Tuesday night to respond to the community. And this child had a family, and I'm wondering, who's supporting them, Dr. Torres-Rodriguez?
Yes, we have extended our support to our family. Again, we are holding the family close to our hearts, and we'll continue to do that. And yes, with regard to the town halls, we actually started our first one with our Sports and Medical Sciences Academy community. And then we quickly the next morning expanded it to our community partners, knowing that, we have partners in our schools throughout the day, before school, after school, providing supports to students and oftentimes to their families while during the school day. And so we also wanted them to be aware. Our faith leaders already were trained. And so for families and partners, again, on Tuesday, this will focus on substance and opioid identification, awareness, and prevention. How can you have a behaviorally appropriate and age-appropriate conversation, and how they can support children and youth through this?
Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez is Superintendent of Hartford Public Schools. Thank you for coming on the show today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. Coming up, we're going to hear from a Connecticut mother who lost her son from an opioid overdose. And we're going to learn how more people have needed help in the pandemic. You can join us. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. According to the state, 1,374 people died of an accidental drug overdose in Connecticut in 2020, and more than 8 out of 10 of those deaths were caused by fentanyl. We're talking about this after a 13-year-old Hartford student overdosed and died after taking fentanyl while in school. Now, it's rare to see overdoses among children, but we wanted to talk more about the role of fentanyl in overdose deaths and what can be done to help people who are struggling with substance substance use disorder. Joining us now on Zoom is Dr. Craig Allen. He's medical director and vice president of addiction services at Rushford. That's part of Hartford Healthcare. Dr. Allen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lucy. Thanks for having me on.
You've been working in this field for some time. How did you react to the news of this child's death to fentanyl?
It was a terrifying thing. It's frightening. My thought was at first, how could this be? How could this happen? A kid so young. The statistics nationally show that it's rare for kids this age to be using opioids. Much more likely to be, if they are engaged with substances, to be using nicotine, vapes, marijuana, alcohol. So it was a big shock. However, having worked in the field for a long time and seeing the skyrocketing numbers, this epidemic of opioid overdoses we've been seeing in Connecticut and across the country, and particularly the rise in the opioid overdose deaths in the non-Hispanic the numbers of non-Hispanic whites, the rate had always been highest until COVID, when the rate of opioid overdose deaths of non-Hispanic blacks exceeded non-Hispanic whites. And then in 2021, almost 1.5 times greater than non-Hispanic whites and non-Hispanic blacks. And in the Hispanic population, for the first time ever, the rate of opioid overdose deaths exceeding that of non-Hispanic whites. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. If there's a sea of fentanyl, a sea of opioids in our cities, for some of it to eventually seep into the schools, should on some level, I guess we should have expected it.
Let's talk more about fentanyl. It's a synthetic opioid. I understand it's for severe pain. It's 100 times more potent than morphine. Talk about its role in this overdose crisis.
Yeah. We're for the most part, we're not talking about medical fentanyl. Although this illicitly made fentanyl coming in from China and from Mexico is as strong, it's not fentanyl being swiped out of drugstores, or out of people's medicine cabinets. It's stuff that's available on the street. It's really, really inexpensive. It is really, really potent, as you say, and it has been used in other drugs like cocaine. We find people who thought they were using cocaine, who've overdosed on opioids, revived with naloxone. It's been put out there in the form of benzodiazepines like Xanax and diazepam, these illicit pill presses to make it look like opioid analgesics, OxyContin, and actually it's fentanyl, and fentanyl is 50 times more powerful than heroin is. Fentanyl can make you high like other opioids, that euphoric feeling because of the effect it has on the reward pathway. It also has the analgesic pain killing effect on the pain pathways. But unfortunately, all of these opioids also affect the brainstem where our respiratory drive center is located, and it suppresses respiratory drive and can impair the body's response to elevated carbon dioxide levels, and people can suffer brain injury from lack of oxygen or death. So we have seen the number of fentanyl-related opioid overdose deaths skyrocket. Now, over 85% of all opioid deaths are related to fentanyl, whereas 5-10 years ago it was primarily heroin, much less expensive, ubiquitous, everywhere, and it's tragic. It's changed the rules. It's changed the rules, the way we're trying to fight this epidemic. People that try it for the first time can die, and that is part of the crisis when it comes to adolescents and young adults whose brains, developmentally appropriately seek out novel new experiences, historically may have tried substances like marijuana or alcohol, and suffered the consequences. But now there's no morning after if someone gets into fentanyl, experimentally, developmentally appropriate, trying something new, but they can die.
You're hearing Dr. Craig Allen, Medical Director and Vice President of Addiction Services at Rushford, part of Hartford Healthcare, as we talk about fentanyl, the role it plays in the number of accidental overdose deaths that have risen in our country. You can join us, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Joining us now is a Connecticut mother who lost her son from an opioid overdose. Kelly Fisher is an Enfield resident, and she's founder of the Alex Fisher Foundation, named after her son. Kelly, welcome to our show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your son, Alex, and what happened to him.
So Alex was 22 years old. He was graduating UHart, and he was the best kid ever. He was funny. He was happy. He loved life. He was very, very kind. When we had his wake, his friends from UHart came in and they were saying, "Oh, I met Alex because I was sitting alone." And he said, "Don't sit alone. Come on over with us." Just a very, very kind person, a great heart. And he was 22 years old, and his friend from fourth grade gave him an Oxycontin to try, and it was laced with fentanyl. And he passed away on that one time.
I'm sorry to hear that. That was in 2016. We just heard Dr. Allen talk about the role of fentanyl and how it just takes one time for this to happen. And so that resonates with you, Kelly?
Yes, oh, definitely. One time, that's all it takes. And that's what I try to get to the kids, that it only takes one time. One time. It's Russian roulette.
Before he died, what did you know about fentanyl?
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. I know way more than a mom should know about it now.
And so you started the Alex Fisher Foundation, named after your son, to help families, to help educate them, as well as to talk to young people. And so can you talk more about that and some of the questions that you've come across, and how you've seen it in your local community?
Oh, it's prevalent here. We have a trailer that we take town to town for free. So if anybody needs us, we do it for free. We just don't want another family to ever have to go through what we are. The trailer shows parents where kids would hide drugs and alcohol. We have probably 80 different hiding spots that you would never know. It's hidden in plain sight. We also have opioid goggles. We have drunk driving cart, and you can put on different levels of drunkenness and drive the cart with that. We also give out scholarships to high school seniors in Enfield. The last 2 years, we gave out $27,000 in scholarships. So we really try to get the kids involved by talking about the drugs and alcohol, and get them to know that there is a problem in the town. And it's heartbreaking to read some of the scholarships with what the kids write, what happens in their own families and to their friends. It happens.
So tell me more about that. Some of what these young people have shared with you.
Some say like their father was a drug addict. Their moms were drug addicts. Their uncles were. They lost brothers and sisters. And it's heartbreaking. We give the scholarships to kids who we don't necessarily need them to be an A student, because we realize if you have issues in your home, you're normally the one taking care of everybody. So you can't always do your homework, and you can't always get everything done that you need to get done. You're trying to juggle being the parent in the house as well as going to school.
We heard earlier from the Hartford Superintendent about the conversations that they're hoping to have with students and figuring out, what's age appropriate. And I'm wondering if you can chime in on that, because you are talking to families and the role that parents play in this conversation and how to have it.
Sure. We say talk early and talk often. Tell them what you expect from them at a young age. You don't have to go into the drug scene and everything like that, but make sure you tell them what you expect them and how you expect them to behave when they're out, because those behaviors become second nature to them. And when they go to do something, they think, oh yeah, my mom won't let me do this, I shouldn't probably do it. Don't talk to them accusatory. You have to just have an open dialogue with them right from when they're little. Start having that dialogue, because most of them get on the defense if you start talking to them about this. Just really early and often. And I also say, if your kids are at the age where they're going out with their friends, give them a secret signal password to text you. It can be anything from, I forgot to feed the cat, to, help. And just have them, that will be the signal for the parents to come and pick that child up with no questions asked. Just come get them and get them out of the uncomfortable situation that they're in.
You're hearing Kelly Fisher here on Where We Live. She's an Enfield resident, founder of the Alex Fisher Foundation, named after her son who died from an opioid overdose in 2016. With us also on Zoom is Dr. Craig Allen, Vice President and Medical Director of Addiction Services at Rushford. That's a substance use prevention and treatment center. Dr. Allen, I wonder if you can respond to what Kelly shared about the conversations families should be having.
Yeah, I thought that's a great idea. When you have an older kid, an adolescent, young adult, a way for them to let you know, come pick me up. And I talk with kids too. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist and addiction medicine doc, and a parent of a teenager and a young adult. And I think it is a great strategy. And even with adults, going into difficult situations where they're trying not to imbibe or utilize or use a drug, having a plan is really important. And being able to say, hey, my parents, they're really, put it on your parents, little institutional transference, as we say in the business. My parents say I got to come home. My parents, I had a colleague years ago who's had a family history of substance use disorder, and that is a big risk factor for kids and adolescents who are using substances to use and to develop problems, is having that genetic history. But this colleague said that they would test. They told their kid, and they actually did it. They tested them for substances, and maybe that was a little bit strict, but the idea, and I've used that once in a while with some of the kids I work with. I said, if you got to tell these guys, they're really pressuring you. Say, my parents test me. They make me do a urine drug screen when I come home. I mean, anything your child would need as a tool in the toolbox to get out of a difficult situation is important. So I really liked that point. And I'm thinking back to one of the things that Dr. Torres-Rodriguez said that's really important, which is this is about fentanyl, but fentanyl's only a small piece of this. One of the leading public health problems, if not the leading public health problem in the United States, is adolescent substance use and substance use problems. And, there's statistic out there, but 90% of adults who have a substance use disorder started using addictive substances before they were 18 years of age. So that could be nicotine, alcohol, cannabis, 96% before the age of 21. So it's really important. It's important to talk to your kids, let them know early. And I was on one of these calls earlier that one of these forums Dr. Torres-Rodriguez was talking about. And the idea of talking to kids as young as 5 years of age. But at that age, you might be saying, here's medication mommy's taking, dad's taking for a headache. don't touch this. It's dangerous. We don't want you to have it. So you can start to introduce the idea when they're young. As kids are getting older, you're looking for teachable moments. With young children, something that was on TV, a character in a book, and you can talk about it that way. Kids get into middle school. What do you know? What have you heard? And then, adolescence. What are you seeing? What are the consequences? What are your thoughts about it? And it's really important. And I think that Kelly, hit this one on the head. You don't want to ask an adolescent a yes or no question unless you want to hear yes or no, because they don't want, they're going to get out of that conversation with you. You want to have open-ended questions, opportunities to engage in a conversation, and create space for that to happen, and let them know your feelings about it. One of the things that I've heard this for years, and I'm concerned about, is the idea that cannabis, marijuana, is safe for everyone. And it's not safe for everyone. There are high-risk populations. And one of the highest risk populations are children, adolescents, and young adults. Their brains are not fully formed. They are much more vulnerable to using substances because of the experimentation factor and the novelty of it, but also to developing problems with those substances. And some of those problems can be lifelong. They can affect cognition, attention, motivation, as well as anxiety, depression. And your brain can be primed, like with those statistics I was mentioning, your brain can be primed going forwards into adulthood to develop substance use disorders. So I think it's a great opportunity to start talking about how we address substance use and addictive substances with our kids in the schools, in the community, so that we have a healthier community overall. And kids are at less risk of coming in contact with things like fentanyl and opioids if they're not using some of these other addictive substances. If you're using cannabis and alcohol, you're around other people that are using it, or they're getting it for you. And if they're getting you that, they might have access to other things, cocaine, opioids, fentanyl. So it all works together. This isn't only about fentanyl. It's not only about naloxone, although that can save your life if you overdose on an opioid.
And Dr. Allen, we'll talk more about Narcan right after a break. You're hearing Dr. Allen, Vice President of Addiction Services and Medical Director at Rushford, here on the show. Also with us is Kelly Fisher, who is the founder of the Alex Fisher Foundation. We'll be back after a short break. This is Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today we're talking about the opioid epidemic with my guest, Dr. Craig Allen, Vice President of Addiction Services and Medical Director at Rushford, that's part of Hartford Healthcare. And Kelly Fisher is here, an Enfield resident and founder of the Alex Fisher Foundation. Dr. Allen, before the break, you mentioned Narcan or Naloxone. Began this conversation about this opioid antidote thrust into the spotlight again because of this case within a Hartford school. So let's talk more about naloxone. And again, in our state, I believe it's up to school districts, local school districts. There's no statewide law that says all schools should have this. Does that concern you? It does concern me. I think that this is an easy opportunity. It certainly is going to enhance awareness that this could happen. Naloxone, so just to set the table, naloxone is a medication that can be administered with a squeeze intranasally in the nose. And naloxone binds to the same receptors that opioids bind to, but it binds stronger and can knock those opioids off those receptors. In the brainstem, that has to do with your respiratory drive system. If you use this with another type of overdose, alcohol, benzos,
that it won't work. It won't help you, but it won't hurt you. And this is a safe medication, safer than aspirin, safer than acetaminophen, Tylenol. We've been working with schools and police departments at Rushford for years, 4, 5, 6 years now. But it is something that is determined by the school district whether or not they want to have this in their schools. And because I don't know the reasons, but it can be things like the numbers are so low, the risk is so low. But as the opioid overdose epidemic has continued, and these numbers that you mentioned at the beginning of the show have gone higher and higher, like 14.6% higher than last year, 2020, then 2019, 2021 is going to be higher yet. It's real important for all parts of the community to have an awareness and have access. Some of us have access to defibrillators and so forth. You're much more likely to come across somebody who has overdosed on an opioid than you are to come across somebody who's had a heart attack. I think defibrillators are really, really important and save lives, and so does naloxone. It doesn't treat substance misuse. It doesn't treat a substance use disorder, but it keeps someone alive so they can get the care that they need.
Kelly Fisher's still with us. Kelly, in your work in the local community where you live, do people have access to Narcan or naloxone? Do they know what it is? Any challenges or barriers that you've seen in getting this in the hands of people that would be helpful?
We do have trainings in Enfield with it. At any event that I have, I most likely would have a trainer and someone to hand out the Narcan. I have John Lally from Today I Matter. He is a trainer and he can train in Narcan and Amplify, or Mark Jenkins from the Greater Hartford Harm Reduction Coalition also can hand out the naloxone. So I do bring them with me a lot of times to different events, or they're at events also. We're trying to get it into the schools. I also think it's important to get into like a mechanical garage where people are working on cars, because people most of the time are doing the drugs in their car. And if they're going to get a car fixed, any one of those mechanics can touch any, spillage. So I feel that's important too. So I'm trying to get it into those kind of shops.
Dr. Allen, I believe Narcan is available in pharmacies, but is this expensive? So I'm wondering if you can talk about free access for people who need it.
Yeah. It can be expensive. You can ask your primary care doc for a prescription. Most pharmacies have certified pharmacists who can give you the medication if you ask for it and give you the training, but it's going to cost you money, and it can be anywhere depending on the type of naloxone you're getting, whether it's the nasal brand or it's other forms. It can be from $50 to $150. There's even more expensive forms out there. So it's important to know where you can get it if you don't have that kind of money. And as Kelly said, there are these trainings. Our prevention department at Rushford does trainings in identifying opioid overdose, administering naloxone, and gives out the free kits. But the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, on their website, they have a listing of a number of different outlets. It includes Mark Jenkins, as Kelly mentioned, his work with the Connecticut Harm Reduction Coalition. And places that you can go and get information and actually get the naloxone to use. I think the more naloxone we have in the community, the better. The drivers on our vans have it in case somebody gets on the van and may have used. We try to do this training for all of our patients, whether they have a substance use disorder or not, because we think it is so important to have this medication and this kind of awareness out in the community.
Dr. Allen, we just have a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to ask you to respond. There was a story earlier, either this month or last, about a national study published by a team at Harvard Medical School and Mass General Hospital that shows that roughly 75% of people with substance use disorder, 3 out of every 4 of them get better, and that more than 20 million Americans are living now in recovery. And why that's important to talk about when we think about substance use disorder. There's so much focus on stigma, and maybe people feel hopeless, but a lot of people are recovering and getting better. Can you talk about that?
I think hope is important in any aspect of your life. But when it comes to medical disorders, medical illnesses, having hope and understanding the facts can it be essential. So for substance use disorders, treatment's available, treatment works. I have a lot of my patients who've gone on to do wonderful things and live rich, fulfilling lives. Yet there's this barrier, this stigma, and discrimination that goes along with having a substance use disorder or struggling with substances. I think that study is wonderful and needs to be highlighted. People do as well in substance use disorder treatment as they do getting their hypertension treated, getting their chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, do as well as someone who's getting treatment for diabetes. So it's not this mysterious disorder that's untreatable, or you have to hit rock bottom in order to get help. You have to really want it. You have to really need it. If someone wants some help, there's help available, and it should be available. And just like any other medical illness, maybe it'll take a number of steps before someone can get into full recovery. But anything we can do to reduce the risk, reduce the harms, naloxone's part of that, is really, really important. And we need to start thinking of substance use disorders like we do other medical disorders, other chronic illnesses.
Dr. Craig Allen, again, is Vice President of Addiction Services and Medical Director at Rushford. That's a substance use prevention and treatment center, part of Hartford Healthcare. Thank you for your time today, Dr. Allen.
Thank you so much for having me on, Lucy.
And thank you to Kelly Fisher, who lives in Enfield, founder of the Alex Fisher Foundation. You can learn more about that organization at our website, ctpublic.org/wherewelive. Kelly, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Today's show produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical director is Kat Pastor. We'll be back tomorrow.